Welcome to the Leathersellers presents Outside a Craft with me, Yusuf Osman. A podcast that seeks to rediscover the purpose and meaning of craft as we navigate complex issues that we face as individuals and together as a society. Good morning, Minh. How are you?
Very good. Thank you for inviting.
Thanks for joining. Yeah. How are you feeling?
Very good. And you?
Well, I'm a little bit nervous. I am a little bit nervous. I always feel nervous, even though, well, it's only my third episode, but still I feel nervous because, of course, I want things to go well.
Absolutely. Me too. But I try to come and share about things, and hopefully it's be a productive conversation.
So I've been to your home, which is also your studio, and your gallery and your art space and all of the things. And I guess I think it would be useful to have your introduction about how you see yourself and your practice, because for me, I think leather craftsman doesn't really fully portray your philosophy. So how would you say?
Well, I started leather work a while ago, maybe 10 years ago. And nowadays it's something that is very apparent in my life. But trained in architecture, and before that also I paint a lot as I was a kid. So I enjoy doing these things. And somehow working with leather, allow me to somehow pay more attention to these little details. And throughout my study in architecture, I was able to accumulate, along with working with leather, some sort of way of thinking that I trying to theorize nowadays, I would say. And I think of using for some reason, I think of leather as a first form of architecture, a shelter for the body, if we may say. And that's why I feel human and leather has some sort of very intimate and nice relationship with each other. It's something that brings warmth to some sense. So yeah, that's why I cherish it as a material.
I really like that way of thinking about leather as the first shelter, you said.
Yeah, I mean, it's. I don't think there is any historical proof of sort, or maybe there may be, but in what I think, we may hunt an animal and we may digest it, and then we left with the bones and the skin. So the bones become in some scenarios the jewelry,
yeah.
Whereas the skin becomes, before we have all the houses and all the architecture and whatever, it was the first thing that we put on the body, and it became the shelter for the body in that sense to me. And that's why I think it's the first form of architecture, before all the tents, the houses, everything.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So, yeah.
And so you are trying to incorporate your knowledge of architecture and space and combine that with leather and craft in a way. Why have you decided not to pursue architecture, though, as a career? Because that's what you studied.
Yes, it's correct to say that I'm not pursuing architecture in a traditional sense, where you may say, oh yeah, architecture is about walls, ceilings, and building buildings. But I would argue that I'm actually still pursuing architecture in my very own sense, where I approach architecture from the point of view of the object and from the point of view from the skill of the human, where the architect tend to think, okay, we draw some lines on paper and then we create the space and the human occupy and inhabit it. But I see architecture forms in a way where it's from the object and the activity that happens around the objects, and then the space starts to form, and slowly the architecture will take shape. And at the same time, the reason why leather is kind of prominent or important in my practice is because I see leather craft is something that is a very long-lasting sort of craft. It allows for things to last for a long time. And when that happens, I feel like there is some sort of relationship and an identity that can form between the human and their space over time. And that to me is something that I feel is a little bit losing in kind of the very fast-paced industrial housing or spatial interior market.
So I think to sort of summarize what you've said is that you think that architecture should be formed as a reflection of us and the objects and the way we live, rather than the way that architects do it now is that they design the space and they fit the human in, and we have to work towards the design of a box rather than the boxes being, well, they wouldn't be boxes necessarily, but rather than spaces being designed for us.
On that note, I do feel like if there were no such boundaries, then in my mind, I think everybody would be craftsmen of their own. Because if we sometimes look at animals, we may, I'm not saying every animals, but some animals, for example, let's talk about a bird. So a bird doesn't, the way they construct their space is that they scavenge for things within the distance that they can travel within the energy. And so they scavenge, which in our society we may think of trash, things that are just lying around. And they bring it and then they construct their nest out of it. And that's something that I do in my practice as well, is that a lot of the time I gather sentimental items or found objects to make usable objects, for functional objects for the home. And that to me is something that is very beautiful, but a bit lost in our life.
I really loved, for example, the table that you have in your home, which you constructed from a found pool table.
Oh, yes.
Which you divided up into quarters, right? Or more than that?
Yeah, it's about 12 sections.
12 sections. Yes. And then you filled all of those sections with sentimental items from your life, which normally we would not know what to do with, or we would throw away. And then you filled it with resin. And suddenly it encapsulates, I don't know how many moments of your life, but then it becomes a centerpiece of your home, of your space. And using all of those things as memories, but also then becomes a functional object. I really loved how you put all of those things together. And I think definitely that I struggle with the definitions of like artist and craftsperson, and it's partly because those definitions didn't exist. There was no real definition between an artist and a craftsperson. And if we are to think of art as something without rules and craft as something with a structure or set of rules to follow, then, as you say, I think all of us, however we choose to live our lives, we're all tasked with the art and craft of being human. And we have to do that if we want to live a meaningful or fulfilling life. And that might not mean that we are all making things as such, but the act of being human in itself is both an art and a craft. And we have to figure out those things, whether that be crafting our relationships or the art of finding out how to be fulfilled, because certain things are more loftier to achieve than others. And we certainly don't have a rule book.
Yes.
And that's the same with craft, we have to figure things out through the doing, which is very much in our life. So for me, the practice of making materially informs how I live, because it helps me to identify the relationship I have with myself, with the world, through the material and with other people. I think for what I think is that we not everybody would be. We already are. And this podcast series is called Outsider Craft because I've always felt that I was an outsider. But I think we are all actually craftspeople, however you choose to define it in the broadest sense. And we are made, especially in Western societies, to feel like outsiders in the own crafting of our lives because we are so far removed from the day-to-day humanness, really.
So it's almost as if there is some sort of external forces that not allow you to do yourself.
Basically, yeah. And if I think about the trips that I have taken, and I am assuming that maybe it's the same from where you come from in Vietnam. So if I compare my experiences of being in India versus being in Singapore and then in the UK and then Bali, so they are very different in the way that they approach what craft is. So, for example, in India and Bali, I saw very much craft being a part of life. There is no difference between being a human, living your life, doing the day-to-day and craft. It's all inherently built in. So, for example, in Bali, every day they do offerings to people, to gods at the temples. And those things are all crafted from leaves. It's got handcrafted flowers and stuff. And it's all made every day by somebody locally in the village, and it's passed around and then it's offered to the temples and the gods. So from that little element up to the fact that everything in the temple is crafted by someone locally, from stone to the masks that they wear for their ceremonies, which are crafted from leather and from palm trees, it's all just a part of life.
Yes.
And so they're not outsiders to anything. It's very much a way of being. And I think maybe it's the same for you when you were growing up in your country.
No, absolutely. In my family, I would think there was a sort of a scene of that, where my grandmother was very much, I would call a hoarder, say similar to me, which, if defined by the medical institution, is actually a kind of a disorder, disorder. But yeah, similarly to what I was talking about with the birds earlier, I think hoarding is very much our nature, where we scavenge things and we build our environment out of it. And then as a hoarder as well, she would categorize everything, some rubber bands, some little metal sticks, whatever. But she then categorized it and used them very well. And so it's not just that accumulating, but also utilizing them in a very smart way. And I'm not. I try to be like that. So I also hoard a lot of things, but sometimes I forget about them.
Yes.
And that's why my house is filled with a lot of random stuff. But yeah, lately I find a way to actually turn them into meaningful objects, like the table that you mentioned, and that when it becomes that table, firstly, as you said, it becomes a centerpiece and also a conversational piece instead of being stowed away in closed cupboards. But at the same time, it allows me to further kind of reinforce or further create a deeper relationship with these objects. And that's what I meant by a space that is not homogeneous and not ubiquitous, but rather something that you really have a connection with, like a sense of belonging to. And that, to me, I think what's craft bring about to a space.
I think I remember something that you mentioned in one of our other conversations about how spaces are becoming really homogenous. And also, I think that links back to this concept of hoarding. And it's very interesting that you say that our nature is hoarding, because very much where we are now in the West is everything is about getting everything beige and minimal. We want as few things as possible. We want things to be clean and tidy, which is also very much at odds with the culture of materialism, which is about consumption. And yet we want to consume, but make it look like our homes are empty and it's also interesting what you said about you know, if your friends invite you to their new home, for example, even without you going there, you kind of know what it's going to look like because you know that it's going to be filled with the type of objects that they will have purchased from IKEA or something similar. You kind of know what their homes would look like, and you're very much against the homogenization of spaces. And I think it reminded me of this article I read about a study where it was analyzing the removal of color in society and how, relating it back to architecture, how spaces globally are becoming more homogeneous because color has always been used to define identity. If you look at any culture, it's always been identified by color and by lots of stuff, actually. And by making spaces homogeneous, not only is it removing identity, it at once both makes us feel at home wherever we go. So I can go from here to a cafe in Singapore, to a cafe in Bali, to a cafe in China, and at once feel at home, but not at home because it's not my home. So these spaces make us feel like they're ours because we feel comfortable in them because they are homogenous, but yet they're not ours because we don't have any mark to put our identities on them through objects, through color, which is all linked to a sense of a community putting an ownership on a space. So it's kind of like the privatization of and the homogenization and beigification of spaces.
I see. Yes. Well, firstly, not to attack minimalism, but I think it may exist on theory, but in practice, it to me is something almost impossible to achieve. It's almost as if to say, can you become a blank slate? And that is something. In my mind, impossible to achieve. And I was about to say something that I forgot. Anyway, about the color, I tend to think a culture or like the color representation of something tends to be derived from the surrounding of that kind of culture, so that it's not suddenly that, let's say, Vietnam decided to use some certain specific colors, but rather it was a response to the surrounding environment. And as these ideas of standardization and beigification came about, they suddenly tried to water these things down in order to fit some sort of standard or trend of the sort. And that's when things become losing in their culture and identity.
I think very much so. Things would have been defined by what you had around. Like, as you said, it would have been the colors that were in your environment, the materials that you had access to. And so I don't know, how do we live in a globalized world where we all want to experience other cultures, while at the same time, in some ways, we don't, because we want things that we're comfortable with, which is why things start to become similar all around the world. And I don't know if it's social media that has a part to play, and also this culture of reviews. And if I can link it back to my current trip, generally speaking, when I want to make decisions, I spend a long time because I think that there is a right decision. And actually, there's no such thing as a right decision. You just have to make a decision. And I think that if I spend more time researching, if I spend more time looking at things, reading things, thinking about things, reading reviews, that I will be able to make the right decision. And so in some ways, we are trying to protect ourselves from something going wrong. But you can book the most expensive hotel or go to the most expensive restaurant and something can still go wrong. So, and you can maybe book a random place to stay, and it could be the most amazing experience with a local family, and you just don't know how things are going to turn out. So
Yes,
no
yes.
amount of reading reviews, spending time thinking about things can help you to make a good decision, because you have no idea what the outcome of anything you do will be. So it's this kind of, we want to experience things, but yet we want to protect ourselves from things going wrong. And so there's, I suppose, this element of control or something.
But if I may ask, so with that kind of thinking, when you are making crafts or making your leather work, do you tend to try to find this sense of control?
Yes.
Or or do you let it actually quite loose?
No, I don't. And that's one thing that that's one thing that probably has got me to this point now where I feel so frustrated. Because,
Oh, yes, you did mention.
Yeah, because I was trying to control the craft. Like, if I get to a certain place, if I am good enough with something, then I will be able to control the outcome of it. And it's just again not how it works. And I think very much so I want to maybe try and relinquish some of that control, and thinking that because we can't control the outcome, all we can control is what we do in this moment. And
well, in a way, I feel like it's a little bit similar to the point you were saying earlier about the struggle we choose to go with, or the problems we choose to solve in our lives. And obviously, regardless of which direction you take in your practice, there will be struggles you need to deal with. But it's also someone who I can't be able to quote precisely, but someone has said it's those who let things like a little bit out of control that end up being so. Yeah, I think put it shortly is that to gain control, you need to lose control.
Yeah.
And I so that's my thinking for the moment, is that you're trying to control too much in your practice, perhaps. So
Yeah, and I think it is about, again, trying to get an outcome, and you can't control the outcome. Even if you spend all of your time working in your craft, the only thing that you'll end up doing is what kind of happened to me, is kind of having a burnout, because I think things just have their own pace.
no, yes, absolutely. But it's the enjoyment of solving these problems that you enjoy rather than reaching that end goal. It's almost like, so let's say you reach it now. Would that be the end, or would you like to continue solving these problems? Sort of scenario, if I may think. Because yes, once let's say you reach that thing,
this rhetorical place that you're trying to get
then
to.
I suppose you would still want to have more problems to solve in this leather sense. And therefore, there's no point of reaching, or maybe there won't be an end reach in some sense.
Just in the book I'm reading, in a chapter I read this morning, there was a similar thing, which is that we are all trying to get to a place where we think we will be happy and we won't have anything to do anymore. We're inherently problem solvers, yet we're all trying to get to a point where we will not have to solve any more problems. So we think that we want to get to this place where suddenly everything will be fine, when there's never going to be that place, because there will always be things that we want to do. I think it kind of goes, when you were saying something about blank slate, there have been moments in my life where I've tried to be minimalist and it just doesn't work. So you might get rid of a whole load of stuff, but then you need to do stuff. So, or I like to do things, right? So if I want to cook, then I'm like, oh, I got rid of those things, but now I want to bake. And then if you want to do anything to a particular standard, you need things for that. Of course, you can work with the bare minimum, but there's a reason why we've developed more tools to do things because it allows us to achieve different standards of things. Same with leathercraft. I could do it with the bare minimum tools, but if I want to achieve something else, then yes, I need a splitter and a skiver. And there's a reason why we made all of these things.
Yes,
It's to allow us to achieve different levels of things. And as much as we can be innovative with having the bare minimum, which is also a practice in itself, people did make wonderful cakes just with a wooden spoon and their elbow, their arm strength and their bicep strength, right? People still made stuff without mixers and splitting machines. But if you want to do different things, you need the right tools. So then you have to buy stuff and have stuff. So it's interesting.
Somehow in my mind, I feel like if you were to be the blank slate, then obviously you won't have any expectation of the end goal of some sort. So that, if you become that, then I think that is more or less the end, because you have no place to go. You have no expectation to be. You have nothing to kind of tend to, in a sense. But craft somehow gave me this sense of living, or the sense of feeling in life where... And I keep wanting to bring back to this bird, because I just feel like, okay, if we don't have these kind of... I can't specify what things they are, but like these things that we need to tend to in life, then at the end of the day, we are in our body and we need to have a space to be or to inhabit or to live in. And therefore, because of that, then with whether your craft ability is like very simple or you like to be very, very detailed and extravagant, but it's a constant kind of, to me, a constant thrive to make a space not better, but more fitting to yourself. And obviously we change over time. The environment change, the weather may change, everything may change. It's a constant flux, the earth. And because of that, it's our environment may also change. And that's what I think craft brings about. And because of that, there isn't really an end to reach, in a way.
So it brings about, what, a sense of surety in a changing world? Or?
No. I think it brings about this kind of ambiguity and this kind of... a sense of wanting to just keep going and adapting and changing your environment and your I don't know if it's right to say, if it's keep you busy and keep doing things that you enjoy to make your environment more adapting to you. But that's...
How did you go about developing the philosophy that you have about incorporating craft and space? Is it something that has always been on your mind, or is it something that came about through your architecture practice? How did you mix all of those things together? Because your home is your workshop, is also your art space, is your gallery, and there doesn't seem like there's a dividing line between all of those things, which makes it really exciting. And also, I don't think that anyone can really truly get a sense of it without actually being in your space. Even seeing it on Instagram, you don't get a sense of the fullness of your practice until you're actually in it, and then you understand what it's all about. How did it come about?
Well, if I must be honest, I don't think I know the actual answer, because I'm still in that process of kind of trying to understand it myself as well. But it's all these things that I am interested in, and therefore I allow myself to, pursue them. Even though sometimes there may not be a worthwhile payback. Maybe what I meant is monetarily.
Yeah.
But obviously, in terms of my consummation, it gives me some satisfaction. And because of that, I don't know. I guess that's why I came up with my saying that if there was no such boundaries and everybody be craftsmen, because that's what I'm doing. And I really enjoy those things. And yeah, I don't think there's in my mind a way that I can, let's say, theorize my kind of practice, but it would tend to stay kind of interdisciplinary and with no unbounded fields.
I guess
if that makes sense at all. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you are theorizing through the living of it, and that's how it comes across.
And because yes, so maybe in a sense, both you and I and me on my daily basis are trying. Me is trying quite hard to define what I'm doing, but the beauty that we've been talking about is that actually, if we were to let everybody be kind of like free in a sense, then we would all be very different. And to be able to describe to someone else your practice would be super hard, because there won't be such definition as artist or lawyer or craftsman or of the sort. And then everybody you meet would have a whole different set of skills, whole different things they do. Their house would be very different. And to get to know them would take probably a long time. And it's not just like a word that you say, oh yeah, this is what I think.
I think that's exactly why I have the issue with definition, because it is so hard to define. And in some ways, that's what would cause the problem, right? It's going back to this idea of asking a child, what would you like to be when you grow up? It's very constricting, and it's better to ask, like we said, what kind of problems would you like to solve, or
what kind of skills you
what
like
kind
to
of
learn,
skills
yes.
would you like to acquire? And in that case, that can be as broad as the person is different. Obviously, there's architecture in your practice and there's leathercraft, but you also work with wood. And of course, I suppose all of the found objects is a practice in itself.
So, yes, which is why I feel like I would really want to bring the leather conversation into architecture and vice versa. Because then that's what I feel like that it's the unexpected things that may came about. And yeah, for some reason even though wood and leather has been something that we have in humankind, I think we've been using it for a very long time. But for some reason, maybe I'm just very ignorant, but I don't find a lot of objects that are leather and wood together. I mean, there certainly are. It's just that not, in my mind, not enough. And that's what I want to develop more. And so the wood craftsmanship of mine came from when I was studying architecture, and I was making a lot of models. And model making was like my very something I really enjoy. And it's also something that is very lacking in architecture, because I don't know, nowadays it's all about renders and like nice renders and how to get built fast and good value. But I find model making is actually a very good language in communicating with each other during the design process. And personally, if I were to practice architecture, I would really, really want to bring that back. Not back, but bring that forward, like a bit more.
What do you think architecture students lose by removing the physical making of models? What do you think they lose?
I would
in their
think
practice?
they lose a lot, in a sense that they lose their three-dimensional understanding of a space. They lose because when we may think of very detailed and very finely made architecture models, but at the same time it can be very sketchy and very quick in terms of communication. So sometimes I may start to describe to you, let's say, this room or some room, but when we're not in this room, and it would be very hard to say with you in words. I may say something and you may imagine something different, and then you say, oh, okay, I got it, but it's actually not the same thing that we are talking about. And a drawing too, a 2D representation can be a good one, but sometimes limiting. Whereas I find that a sketch kind of model where if I give it to you and then we both look at the same angle, then we are really on the same page. And that to me is, so in what I was saying, I guess, to me, the physical model is even beyond language, like verbal language, because it allows to communicate more precisely. So I may give you an architecture model and say, this is my idea. And that, as an idea, would maybe say more than a paragraph, and it would be more precise.
And it also transcends like cultural barriers, like if you are from different backgrounds, when you put everything together in a model, you can convey an idea that transcends
that words may not be able, or
language, culture, or it's just there, isn't it? It's a physical thing that you can manipulate and inhabit in some ways.
And so if we, so architecture is now seen as I think a kind of very, I don't know the word, but in essence, I think it's also very come down to crafting. It's crafting, okay, it may be crafting of a very big piece of object, but yeah, in essence, it is to me the crafting of activity, the crafting of life. Spaces, yes. I would think a good architecture or a good architecture design would reinforce these character and identities. And occasionally, in my mind, which is also the reason why I run like leather workshops in like this small house of mine, which most of the time it's a kind of a private space. I live there on my own, and most of the time it's just one person. And if we were to think kind of architecturally, then yes, if you go through my entrance door, that's my space and no one goes through. But occasionally on my exhibition days or when I run workshops, I would like people to think about it as a sort of, and let's just say it's a kind of intermediate zone, which is not binary, not a private or public, but it's a kind of zone of both, where people can come and feel at home and use my space to craft whatever they want to make and bring it home and embed it into their living environment.
This kind of idea of shared spaces, really, because so you go inside an alleyway and then there's this like massive home, but it's also got a temple, which is the house temple, but also people of the local community will be able to use it. So there's a family's home, and each home has a temple, which is their house temple, but also the community can partake in it. So you have this kind of what you're saying, this shared space.
Yeah, the temple of every household is a kind of like not private zone, but whether
exactly.
It could be private.
It could be private because it is their home.
Yes.
But it's also every morning people from the local area will come, because you might have a temple for X god, they might have a temple for another one. So you might, if one day you want more wealth or more peace, you might go to their temple. So it's this like, this is my private home for my extended family, but also it's a community space, and some people from the local community might come and put things outside your home in your temple. So it's this kind of grey zone. And then also some homes will have a space for different family members. They will have a burial ground. They'll have different statues of different gods, and they may have a shop for things that their family might make. They might have an area outside for crafting, and they may have a space for performance for different deities. So it's very much what we've been talking about in this kind of mixed use space that is at once public and private. And of course now they also have tourists coming into it, right? So they have people like me going in and looking, and I find that, but that's also part of culture, right? So that's something that
it totally is, and
can be achieved.
Yes, I totally agree. And it's funny that it's such different thinking in different cultures, because I would think those people wouldn't be afraid if we were to done something wrong in those spaces. I mean, there would be problems, obviously, and they wouldn't be so happy if we suddenly drop some important statue. It would be very bad. But they allow these things to happen, as we can see from the way they opened their door instead of leaving it closed. And it's if you were to put it in the way we were talking earlier, it's like the ability that they were able to, I wouldn't say gain control, but maybe gain some sort of, I don't know what would be the word, but they were able to lose control in a sense, like to let go of the control, to allow like conversation, or to allow random things to happen, which is something I think very lacking in my life here, and in my practice at least, I feel that craft is something that craft and space is the medium or the tools that I use to allow these things to happen. But yeah.
I think for me that was very much something that I felt, well, I didn't know it was something that was lacking, but very much so now. I can't imagine going in my studio and locking myself away to work. I can't imagine doing that. So I definitely think that my craft needs to be something that opens me up to the world, and that I open the world, I allow the world in. And I think the pandemic was, even though I quite enjoyed the time that I had locked away in my studio and I could do it and I didn't have to make any excuses about it, but I think looking back, it was a really unhealthy time because I developed an unhealthy relationship to my work, because I thought that it was healthy to be in my studio working all the time, just on my own, making stuff.
I think it's so what I was trying to say earlier, I think we, as the kind of like we change all the time basically, and it's okay to have those moments where you feel like, okay, maybe I lock myself up for 3 months and work very hard, but then after that, if you don't feel like that anymore, you have to you start to not do that, and you start to maybe open the door and do other different things. But it's to look back. It's to criticize yourself in that sense, I think is then become unhealthy. But at that moment, obviously, you chose to do it, and you felt good at that point. Then it's good, and obviously, I'm sure you must have achieved something during that time.
So, what would be your tips then?
Oh, my tips
in terms of, because we've spoken broadly about concepts, but ultimately it's the same thing, is how do we create space for ourselves as individuals in a world that seeks definition? How can we find this balance in our spaces, in our desire to be productive, in our desire to work, and in our desire to still obviously earn financially? So in all of these ways that we must live, because of the demands of the world in which we exist, how can we create moments and spaces and ways of being that allow for us to be healthy in all of the ways that we need to be? Like, how can we achieve it, really, I suppose, is from your point of view?
I must say it's a question that it's a very big question.
Yes.
I think a lot of people are trying to answer this and question this.
How can we approach it from your point of view?
In my mind, I think one of the first thing that, even though I talk about, I kind of like advocate against this idea of standards and systems, but I only mean that by the way that there shouldn't be those kind of imposing systems upon people, but every individual should have a system that they feel comfortable working in or like practicing in. So maybe, as you said, maybe it could be 9 to 5. Maybe it could be that you're a nocturnal person. You sleep in the day and you work at night. so yes, there needs to be a little bit of that. And I think a practice of diary or practice of writing a little bit also helps you to understand, to kind of reflect on yourself. So just do a little bit of writing of like what you were thinking today, and sometimes read it back. And doing some reading also cleanse your mind, in my mind. And if you do that, and also take care of your physical body, so don't overwork and break your back, which actually I'm saying this, but
you do it.
yeah. It's what my father used to say. It's very easy to give an advice, but to do the advice is the hardest. So I'm saying all this, but I also struggle to practice it.
Yeah.
But it's good in those moments that I can do it. Writing, I find, is very helpful. It is a kind of slow theorizing of your practice in a way. So let's say you say, I tried 9 to 5, it doesn't work. I'm trying something else. And it's a kind of a diary that you reflect on yourself. And then, I think, to me, those things are like some of the essences in understanding yourself and the way you work and what makes you comfortable, and to find the balance that I keep talking about between work and life and health. And I wonder if that's comprehensive.
Well, I think, as you said, it's such a big question, and I don't think you can comprehensively answer it. But
Obviously,
absolutely. I think definitely just trusting in the process and living it through experience is probably all we can do, really. And then not looking back, like you said, not looking back and thinking, oh, that moment. I mean, you don't have to beat yourself up for it, but there's definitely lessons you can learn. So if you didn't like that at some point, then you can change. I think that's one thing that is really important is leaning into change and accepting that you do change. I remember when in 2013 I was moving to Malawi, and I was so distraught about the decision. And a colleague of mine, she said, you know that you don't have to stick by any of your decisions. You can make a decision and you can change your decision. So you could move there and you could come back tomorrow if you want to. And that's completely fine. And I think we all make decisions in the moment based on what we know, and then we can live it, and we can decide we don't like it or we like it, and then we can change.
But it is somehow...
and it's completely fine to change.
Absolutely.
And try something new and go back and go forth.
But it somehow reminds me of that thing that you said earlier, the question that we ask kids, that what kind of things you want to do. And somehow we are frowned upon when things change. Like, yes, we can see that in nature, change is kind of like, constant.
A constant.
But for some reason, it's really frowned upon. And so, and then to go back to that question that we ask a kid, so what do you want to do when you grow up? And for some reason, I find, okay, if the kid may say, oh, I want to be a doctor or something, then somehow that answer kind of like really determines. And in some way, if that kids now say, oh, I want to do something else, then the parents or people around them would say, oh yeah, why do you change? Because you said this. Why are you changing now? And that's just a little bit, to me, confining and a bit sad. And it kills this ability to be flexible, let's say.
Yes, because whether we like it or not, we are changing. And whether we accept it or not, we are changing. And so is everyone else, and so is the world. But you're so right that it's so frowned upon for some reason.
And even like, as you said, like changing something else and change back, it's also something that can be done. And when we say that, it for some reason, I feel like, so let's talk about the decision that you made, that you went to Malawi. And you can go there and you can go back immediately the day after, which is like a very short change. So in my mind, let's say, personally, I work with architecture, I work with leather. And if I were to say, if I were to have to kind of stick to the things I do, meaning that, I'm going to change from architecture to leather in a kind of very definitive way, then I may feel like, it's hard for me to change back to architecture now, or like I don't feel right. But a flexible mindset or way of thinking is maybe I can even change between these things day by day, or I can even change by it hour by hour. So I just, this hour I'm doing an architecture thing. I'm thinking architecturally, but the next hour I'm thinking I'm doing some leather work. And it's this kind of flexibility that I think allows to, do multiple different things.
My guest today was Minh Le Pham. Keep the conversation going with me on Instagram @Yusico and find out more about Minh at min.land.